Good morning, everybody, or afternoon or evening, wherever you are. It's morning where I am in Thailand right now, and I am very excited to talk to somebody who I've been listening to for a couple of years. So I reached out to him, and he was very generous with his time, as he usually is with many other people. And just doing a little bit of a deeper dive into James's background. There's a lot more to this gentleman than I actually thought previously. I've heard his commentary on many of the political concerns going on around the world, but I didn't realize how his tenure in integrative health was so deep and complex. So I want to welcome this morning James Roguski to my channel, Awakening in Health. James, good morning. Thank you so much for your generosity with your time.
Well, thank you very much. I have, in speaking to myself, okay, I've created a little tagline that I am trying to manifest. I want to get out of the who and into the new, because we need to focus on what it is we want, probably even more so than what we don't want. So for the last 2 years, I've been trapped in the WHO rabbit hole, digging up all of the things that they're trying to do. So it's important to push back against the things that you don't want, but it's probably more important to know what it is that you do want.
Absolutely. And I've struggled with that as well, because especially with all this stuff that's gone on with COVID in the last few years, it's so easy to have that negative focus. And even just looking at some of the publications that you've been responsible for, I'm just going to actually read them out. I've got them here on my screen. The first one, your doctor is a liar. Natural cancer cures, control blood sugar naturally, the truth about food grade hydrogen peroxide, the undeniable truth about 9/11, the book that will make you rich, oppose the fraud. You've got some absolutely cracking titles there, and I'm guessing with some of the titles, there's a hint there that you have at least a superficial knowledge, if not a very thorough knowledge of the understanding about, I guess, positivity and manifestation. I'm in somebody else's place, so there's a cat running around in front of me there. So excuse the bushy tails. So yeah, so what are your thoughts there about the necessity of keeping that positivity and having your focus towards things that are more pro-human?
I don't even really know how to say, absolutely.
Yeah,
Uh, it's it's the kind of thing, I think I have maybe a different take on it than a lot of people have, but um, when you organize the efforts of others, um, you can do so to where you have it so that they want to stop something. But there's a theory out in the universe that says, um, when you say something like, I don't want that, there's a part of your subconscious that doesn't hear the negative of that. And so you're actually saying, I want that. And it's often difficult to craft language where you're not saying that what you want is, exactly what you want, not the opposite of what you don't want. And I admit I'm certainly not perfect at it. Uh, Saying that you want certain things, like, I want to live in a world where I'm free to travel without having somebody tell me that I have to do something to my body in order to be allowed to travel. Um, I want to live in a world where I'm free to choose whatever it is that I think is important for my health without having to follow some mandate or some other, person's protocols. I've For a little bit of background, when I moved out to California 27 years ago, had a total life reset. I just restarted everything in my life. I ended up managing a couple of mom and pop herb and nutrition stores and homeopathy and aromatherapy, and the type of research that I've been doing with the WHO over the last 2 years. I did that and more, digging into all things natural in terms of health. And quite frankly, I'm lucky. I didn't get there because I had some health crisis. And oftentimes that's what it takes for people to wake up and realize that the path they were on needed to change. My path had already changed financially. I just, everything that I had worked for the first 36 years of my life just disappeared in a poof. And I started over, and what a blessing it was.
So
And so,
If
Yeah.
I can cut across you, James, just for a sec. So and I couldn't really identify for myself that earlier who is James kind of story. So I'm kind of intrigued about that. So you've obviously got this really strong tenure in health. Where did you start from? So as a young man, where were you initially, and how did you get towards that line in health? And then I'm intrigued as to the little story about how you lost your finance, because I've got a little bit of a similar story there.
Sure.
If
Well,
that's not too personal, obviously.
no, I'm an open book.
Yeah.
I am going to be 64 years old in a couple of months. I was born in 1960, and I was born with club feet. My feet were pretty much turned around backwards. I had surgery at 6 months to lengthen my Achilles tendon. I wore braces, and I'm blessed. I had another surgery when I was in kindergarten. I'm actually blessed because whatever the heck it, happened way back then, I have only the slightest memory of, doctor visits and orthopedic surgeons and footwear and all that kind of stuff. But, I played sports and I was actually a state champion power lifter. So it obviously didn't disable me in any way. I had a friend who just recently said, yeah, you do walk a little funny. Um, but it wasn't really an impact on my life. I was a good student, valedictorian in my class, went to an Ivy League institution in New England, went to Brown University, and I dropped out my senior year because I kind of realized I was being lied to. And man, that was a blessing. I had studied computer science, but I didn't really want to sit, in an office coding, writing programs to run computers. But that was before people had computers. Okay, that was 45 years ago. And I ended up being a carpenter. I renovated old homes in New England for about 15 years. Went through a divorce, bankruptcy, and foreclosure all in one fell swoop, and started new. I wish they didn't take over the term the Great Reset, because I went through a personal Great Reset, went through the dark night of the soul, came out alive and realized, okay, well, that wasn't the thing that was going to kill me. Typically, I've spoken to many people who've had near death experiences, out of body, headed towards the light, but they came back. There's only one thing that kills you, so you got to deal with all the rest. And you can look at it and be traumatized by it and never let it go, or you can let it go and move on. And I try to do that. I'm maybe not perfect about it, but if you're going forward, where do you want to go? Yeah, where you want to run away from, maybe, or where you don't want to be, but where are we headed in this world? What is it that we do want?
And it's certainly
You
never
know,
it's
yeah,
it's it's never looked
go
more
ahead.
uncertain, has it? I mean, just there's crazy things going on, which it's almost you can see how they get away with labeling things conspiracy theory, because when you start to see stuff, it's so fantastic that you almost have to pinch yourself that we're actually living through these times. So I'm trying to do a rough mathematical kind of calculation here in my head. So you kind of would have dropped out at uni, I'm guessing, in around those early 20-ish years, 15
Mhm.
years as a carpenter. So you're approaching 40 40-ish when you go through
Mhm.
this very dramatic break in your life.
Yeah,
And
36, 37. Yep.
this is also, I think, very important for me. I like to highlight this, but the what I'm going to throw you a controversial question, I guess, but
All right.
what gives you the right as a carpenter or a person who sees the world to write such provocative books about health, and why did you start that? So again, I'm kind of tackling obliquely the appeal to
Yeah.
authority fallacy here, and I'm sure you got a great answer for me there. Okay.
Well, as I started working in a small mom and pop herb nutrition homeopathic aromatherapy store. No training, no background, no letters after my name. The joke is I don't have any letters after my name, but if I did, it would be FSP, um, short for full spectrum provocateur. The point is, and I really honestly didn't figure this out until I think it was last year. It was around my birthday, and somebody had asked me, what is your sign of the zodiac? What star sign are you born under? and I was born in April, so it was the Taurus sign of the bull. And they said, well, why do you do what you do? And it finally all coalesced in my head. When I see bullshit, I got to say something. And who better than someone born under the sign of the bull than to know bullshit when they step in it? And so when I was working, you know, in nutrition primarily and health, uh, I came across information that essentially took the cholesterol myth and just destroyed it. The cholesterol myth is older than I am. It started in the late 1950s. And when you go back and you research how it started, it's astonishing that it's still hanging in there, right? And there are many lies that are still hanging around. Just say 9/11 to some people, and they don't have a clue as to the fact that the prevailing wisdom, the accepted narrative, it's got more than a couple of holes in it. And so one of the things I've learned to do is to ask people, what do you recall as being your first red pill? Now, if you understand the reference, I believe it started with the movie The Matrix. You take the red pill, you go down the rabbit hole, you see what life is really all about. If somebody comes back to you with that after that question and says, no, the pills I take are purple or blue, or what do you mean red pill, right? They don't even know the concept of awakening to, there's a word in the English language that I think people have backwards. Being disillusioned. That's a wonderful thing, but most people associate it with depression. I'm overjoyed when somebody shatters any illusion that I may have. I was watching a video earlier today while I was doing the dishes, and I was listening to the person had a wonderful argument about a topic that's way down some rabbit hole somewhere. But I'm like, oh, I never thought of that. That's a glorious moment. Now, I think it happened first for me. The first one I remember was in fifth grade. I grew up, I was raised Catholic. I'm a broken Catholic, I guess, at this point. But I went to parochial school, and Sister Mary Ursula was teaching us. I lived in Ohio, but she was teaching us about the national parks of the United States. And she had gotten to California, and she was talking about Yosemite Park. Now, I don't know if you're familiar, but I've always known that to be Yosemite. Now, there's a thing, I haven't ever had it. I must admit, I've seen the jars, but I've never had any. There's Vegemite in Australia, right? It's a food product. And so I raised my hand and I said, Sister, I watch Bugs Bunny cartoons every Saturday morning. Oh, it's probably, more religious about that than going to church. And he's got this character named Yosemite Sam. So is it Yosemite or is it Yosemite? Could be either way, right? And so it was in fifth grade that I realized the people who are teachers don't necessarily know everything. All right. And so I don't know if people ever learn to question authority. At this point, knowing what I've come to know, if you have letters after your name, I suspect that you have been programmed very, very deeply, and you have a lot of things that you have to unlearn. And that's probably the hardest thing to do, is to challenge your assumptions, whatever they may be. To practice the scientific method is to invite criticism, invite people to say, hey, you're wrong. My girlfriend's in the other room, and we joke all the time. She does that to me 25 times a day. She's right 99.999% of the time, and we forget about whatever the other one was.
Yeah,
But that's how you get better. And
absolutely.
our society has wiped that out. You can't speak up and say, hey, wait a minute, that's wrong. You have to follow the prevailing wisdom. That's a recipe for disaster, regardless.
It's a very sophisticated system, isn't it? I mean, I kind of come from that structure. I'm an ex-nurse. I used to work in intensive care and in
Yeah.
mental health and addiction and whatnot. And when you start looking into the history of medicine, especially the history of psychiatry, it is just an
Mm,
evil structure. And then you kind of pull it back to the Flexner report and a little bit before that, and the invention, I guess, of the schooling system. But it's so sophisticated. It's set up to I guess instill a fear of questioning authority. And I certainly carried that with me, and I probably still have elements of that where, you've almost got this military regimented system where you can't question
mhm,
the commander in chief. So
mhm,
again, back to kind of what you're saying now, when I see the letters in front of names or behind names or wherever, I
mhm,
have that massive element of skepticism, if not downright doubt. And the brainwashing involved with those people who do climb up the ladder is very, very deep. There's so many tangents I can take what you just said off
mhm,
into, James. But
mhm,
one of the things that just jumps to mind was somebody I know indirectly who's a nurse who teaches other nurses and doctors, and they've had problems with their weight for
mhm,
20, 25, 30 years. And finally, the penny is dropping about some maybe myths about weight loss, but still, there was this, I heard from somebody else this thing about the high cholesterol came up,
mhm,
and this person was looking at the keto diet and was advised by the doctor not to skip breakfast, to make sure they include carbs, and to go away from fat. This is only about a week ago, and to move away from a high fat diet because of her high cholesterol. So it's not only still hanging around. I mean, this is in Australia. I'm not sure what it's like in America. It's
mhm,
probably even worse. But this is still a really hard and fast, ingrained dialogue that these supposedly health professionals are still pushing. So when, I mean, again, we can take that towards the corruption of the medical advice we're given, or specifically talk about cholesterol, or even many of the other myths which you've addressed in your work. So take that
mhm.
wherever you want.
Well, I think it was 18, pushing 19 years ago that I wrote that because I was working in the health food store, nutrition store, and would be having these conversations with people. And one too many people said, "Oh, Jim, you should write a book about this." And something snapped. And a couple of months later, I had a 540-page book, and I've always given it away. So anybody can go to yourdoctorisaliar.com and download the ebook for free. Don't print it out. You're going to need a ream of paper. But long story short, the word cholesterol, if you're talking about a chemical, means a certain something. If you're talking about what's measured on a blood test, totally different meaning. And so throughout the book, if I was talking about one thing, I would put it in lowercase letters. If I was talking about the other thing, put it in uppercase letters. And until you partition the awareness that the chemical that is listed on the label on food products is different than what your doctor's talking about measuring in your blood, until you clearly understand the difference, you're going to be bamboozled because the language has been manipulated. What your doctor calls cholesterol isn't cholesterol, it's a different measurement. And it all came to pass because we had a licensed clinical nutritionist on staff, and back in the day, they would do blood draws and send it out to the lab, and the lab report would come over the fax machine, just to show you how long ago that was. And I'd glance at it, and at one point, my eyes looked at it, and the high, high, LDL cholesterol and low density and high density cholesterol didn't add up to the total. And I'm looking at it going, what's going on here? Okay. So I asked the nutritionist. She didn't know why. I called the laboratory. They didn't know why. I asked around. It wasn't until somebody referred me to somebody down in the belly of the, laboratory that was doing the thing. "Oh, Jim, that's not what that is." And it was like, wow, disillusioned, which is a great thing. It's like, oh, there's a lie going on here. What the heck? Okay. And then when you dig, you can see that many people say things that are true, but those get buried. And the people who preach the dogma, those get elevated. And so there's this imbalance of access to information. and the lie continues. And it's the same thing with almost any topic under the sun. Um, and so without, going any further down that rabbit hole, um, it isn't what you think it is. And if you don't challenge your assumption of what you believe it to be, and I've recently had discussions on a sort of different level where, with what I'm doing now with the WHO and all that sort of thing, there are a number of people who are talking about it. And many, many times I will get a text message or an email or some kind of communication, and somebody will ask me about something in the news. Jim, did you hear what so and so said? And it's an immediate trigger for me now. It's like, well, okay, that sounds interesting. My first response is, can you send me any documentation? Because listening to what someone said is the definition of hearsay. Wouldn't be admissible in court. Just because somebody said it doesn't mean it's true, right? I say things, I get it wrong. Just because somebody said it doesn't mean it's true. Just because it's in a document doesn't mean it's true, but that's a place to start. I was, just before we started talking, I was reading a communication that I had from somebody about legislation in France that has recently passed. And it's been like pulling teeth to actually get the text of whatever this legislation is. It's probably close to what people are saying it is, but it's not what people are saying it is. And so I've just learned to let all of that wash past me. Okay, somebody said something, somebody said something, somebody said something. There was an event going on. I don't know if you experienced it because it was United States based, but back, I think it was October 4th of last year, the whole world was going to come to an end because they were doing some test of the emergency broadcast system. And if anybody goes back on my Substack to October 4th, I think the title of the article was something like "Fear mongering is not okay." And so I asked all of the people who subscribed to my newsletter in the comments, can you just post whatever people were saying about how the world was going to come to an end when they ran this emergency test of the emergency broadcast system? And people love to generate fear. I guess it gets clicks. I guess it gets attention. I don't know. Even in the alternative media, the vast majority of the information that's out there is be afraid of this, and they're going to do this, and they're going to do that. And while I'm certainly not perfect, I try to put the information out there. It's like, okay, here's what the proverbial they are trying to accomplish. I'm opposed to it. Here's what we want to do to have the world that we want to have, as opposed to, oh my God, there's nothing we can do. They're taking over, and we're going to be in a world of hurt. You either think that way or you don't. You either are looking at, well, what is it that I want? Maybe somebody wants something different and it's in opposition to what I want. But if I'm just talking about what they want, I'm actually helping them manifest it.
I think
And
they're very clever, James. And I guess I'm a bit of a backyard psychologist. I take pride now in not being an expert about anything.
mhm.
But it seems to be that there is a very strong link between fear and stimulation. And I think if we weren't as attacked on those lower chakra levels, those base
Mhm.
needs like shelter and stimulation and sexuality and hunger, we might see past it, but unfortunately, I think we're so bombarded that the stimulation that is derived from fear
Mhm.
we're not even we don't even realize how damaging that is. And these parasites that run the world, they know these tricks. I don't think it's their first time around. I think the whole of history is probably at the very least massively corrupted, if not
Oh,
fully.
I'm gonna go down a rabbit hole here
Yeah,
if
yeah,
you if you
great.
if you let me.
Yeah,
Okay.
please do.
Um, I'm I have a weakness. I'm relatively bad with names,
Yeah.
so I can't remember the author's name, but I believe the book originally came out in the 50s. and it was the pulse test diet. And I think it connects to an addiction to fear, right? Now, we had experienced in the world of nutrition that I was working in for quite some time that many people would not properly digest their food. It would get into their system. They would develop a moderate, not necessarily an allergy to it, but they would have an immune response. They would have circulating antibodies to food. And, people would come in having problems and they would be shocked to learn that their immune system was making antibodies to broccoli or, beans or corn or whatever. It wasn't that it was junk food. It was inadequately digested food triggering an immune response. That's ultimately problematic. Okay? It's not necessarily like, hives or an allergy, but it weighs on people and it typically goes undetected. Well, connected to that in a certain way was this pulse test diet where your body knows if something's good or bad for you. And when you sit down to eat, if what you're eating is good for you, you should just be able to eat it, no big deal. But if you eat something that your body recognizes as being bad for you, not necessarily the person next to you, you'll get an adrenaline rush. And you can sense that in the pulse rate,
Hmm.
thus the pulse test diet. If you've got a normal resting heart rate of 72, say, and you sit down to eat a wonderfully, organic vegan meal, but you've maybe developed an allergy to something in there, or there's a spice that's wrong for you or something, your body knows. You get an alert, you get an adrenaline alert, and you feel better. You're filled with energy
Hmm.
because you're actually under attack. And so people tend to associate that feeling good with a food that's actually bad for them. And you just go, oh, wait a minute, that's backwards. Now, when people watch something, like I was never a fan of horror movies. I don't want to have that fear thing. But man, people jump out of their skin when they're watching that type of thing. And a lot of people, whether it's skydiving or, bungee jumping or, all kinds of risky behavior, the thrill that gets that adrenaline rush going does, in the short term, make you feel, you know, alive and energized and all that. But it drains the life out of you. And so it's counterintuitive a lot of times when people eat a food and it in the short term makes them feel better, the next day when your immune system is dealing with it, you feel crappy. So you go, well, hey, I want to eat some more of that because it made me feel better yesterday. And people get into these habits. What is healthy, it cannot be described unless you're actually analyzing the individual person. Because for somebody who's eaten too much, let's say broccoli, and not properly digested it and triggered an immune response to it, broccoli might not be the best thing for them. They need the variety and they need to improve their digestion. So the answer is that everybody touts as being one size fits all. Everybody should eat this way. Everybody should do that. There's 8 billion answers. And that's what makes this world beautiful is the, diversity and the variety. Um, but you can't make a killing in the market that way financially, because what the industries want is a one-word answer so that everybody buys their product or their drug or whatever, and you just spend a couple of minutes to, oh, you have this symptom, okay, take that poison. It takes time, effort, and a lot of wisdom and experience to look at an individual man or woman, delve into what the heck is going on with them, identify the cause, and make the adjustments. It's so much easier and profitable to just throw a simple answer at everybody, and it doesn't help anybody.
I agree.
So,
And just to add to that, there is massive loads of money being invested in that cause and effect paradigm. And the thing which was a big revelation for me is that, dabbling and having a look at German new medicine, maybe
Hmm.
a
Hmm.
decade or so ago, which ultimately talks about how different people will express their illness. And a good example that I give to people is asbestos and mesothelioma, for example. So it's this idea that this carcinogen causes specifically and exclusively X or Y. And we know through German new medicine that that's not the case. Depending on your traumatic predispositions and how you express your illness, this might cause X for you, but Y for this person and Z for the other person. So I think there's a great overlap with what you've just explained with that.
Yeah, once you've had personal experience with methods other than the pharmaceutical, surgical, radiation, chemo for cancer and stuff. Once you've seen what else is possible that addresses that variety, kind of like you said, when you see people with letters, before or after their name, you realize the programming. When you see people who are closed to the evidence that, hey, it isn't a one size fits all. There's a little unique factor with everybody. Just as one example, we had this one customer who most people would have said she was a hypochondriac. She had all kinds of problems. And one day I was out taking a walk, and as I was walking through the neighborhood, I saw that she was walking up the stairs to her apartment. And I don't know, 20 or 30 feet from where I would have guessed a bedroom might be, were these high voltage transformers that were just buzzing.
Wow.
And I'm like, oh man, I would never live there. Okay. So next time we saw her in the store, I said, hey, I wasn't stalking you or anything. I just happened to see, I guess you live there, right? I said, I don't know if this is the cause of all of the problems that you're having, but you might consider moving. And she said, oh, I have a lease, I can't move, and the money and the this and the that and the other thing. Okay, fine. Well, maybe not quite a year later, she came back into the store and everybody was like, wow, you look great. What's going on? How you doing? And she's like, I'm doing great. I moved, I got a new apartment, and life is so much better.
Wow.
And when you go and you read into, the many, 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 many stories of how, energy just flows through the earth. Forget about, you know, EMF from transformers or, 5G or whatever. I had an experience where my girlfriend and I were at a sort of alternative health convention type thing, and going through the many booths of everybody selling stuff. And in the span of 10 minutes or so, went from one booth to the next. And it's probably the only regret I have in my life. We went to this one booth, and the woman there had these devices that hung on a chain. You just wear it as jewelry. And her sales pitch was, just try it on, and you tell me if you notice any difference, right? So I put it around my neck, and I was like, wow, what the heck just happened? Okay. Well, I didn't at the time, this was 20 years ago. I just didn't have the $150 to buy one. Right. And man, I wish I did. Right. So that's been lost. If anybody knows of one of those, let me know. Um, then we walked down to the next booth across the way, and they had a little bit more space. And this was in a, big office tower by LAX airport, convention hall, convention type thing in a hotel. And he had the space in his things shaped as a U. And he said, okay, stand here and let me muscle test you. Okay. Which, you hold your arm out and they push down on it. Okay, fine. And he goes, okay, now stand over here and let me muscle test you again. And so I moved over, I don't know, 6 or 7 feet maybe. It's like, you don't need to muscle test me. I could just feel the energy being sucked out of my, my being. Well, he was selling dowsing tools, like for finding water. And so, I'm not an expert at it. I don't know how to do it. And he would walk to one location and he would get whatever signal from it and walk to the other. It didn't matter. I could feel it. Okay. And so if you don't believe that you could be sleeping here and it could in a certain manner, and the energy around you could be, protecting or enriching or supportive, and you could just be in the other room, and the universe is conspiring to just, suck the energy out of you. If you're not in tune with that, no drug, no herb, no, therapy, no anything is going to change the fact that, you're dealing with that energetic drain on your life. And medical doctors will just go, oh, well, we can't make any money off of that. We don't want to talk about that. That's not part of our paradigm.
Absolutely. And another kind of rabbit hole I kind of fell down probably, I guess, over the last 10 years or so, and more. And the more you dig into this one, the vaster it gets is the
Mm,
the power of water. And when you look at
mm,
people like Masaru Emoto, and there's a woman
mhm,
in New Zealand, Veda Austin, and then you relate that back to the double slit experiment, our
mhm,
consciousness does affect material. We know this.
mhm,
Even mainstream science shows that our consciousness affects things. So if we believe that our bodies, and by weight, I think our bodies are upwards of 99% of water, as opposed to by proportion. If we carry this way of thinking, I mean, it goes to show that our belief has
mhm,
to at least in some significant way affect our health. But then to take it down further, if we look at again the double slit experiment about waveforms collapsing, there's a good argument for our bodies or anything that we consider solid to be purely energetic. And just the way we,
mhm,
we interpret our universe means that we have to have this concept of solid matter in order just to exist. So really, the I think the significance of interference from an electrical point of view, whether that's
mhm.
intention or I don't know if I can say a physical electrical component like 5G. That's probably an oxymoron. These things, to my mind, they absolutely have to affect us.
Mhm. Well, tying that into what I've been doing for the last couple of years, which is reporting on these negotiations that the WHO is conducting, the simple act of observing an experiment has been said, in physics to have an measurable impact on the experiment. And so I've had conversations with people where the simple act of observing these negotiations, had they just gone on with nobody paying any attention, it's like having an experiment where, nobody's doing the measuring, right? But when you apply your thought to the negotiations, every single person who reads the documents that are being considered has an impact on it.
Interesting.
And so my take has been to pay attention to what they're doing, read the documents, try to understand what they are, highlight the aspects of it that are, of concern, and get other people to think about it. The observer having an impact on an experiment um, raises the question that I think, this is a hypothesis. I don't have the single ounce of, scientific, experimental proof on it, but it's an open-ended rhetorical question. Where do thoughts come from? And, exactly what are they? When a thought comes into your head, you wake up in the morning and you realize that it's a new day. Boom, the thoughts start coming. What do you do with them? How do you handle them? Where do they go when they flow through you? And do you think you own them? And I've had a handful of experiences where my girlfriend and I seem to be on the same wavelength, and she'll be thinking about something. There's no way I should know what she's thinking of, but yet you do. And so if you can admit that, radio or television or, 5G cell phone communications are going through you at all times of the day and night, and you hold maybe a device in your hand, or you've got a TV or something like that that can take that electromagnetic energy and convert it into a video or an audio or whatever, you have to admit that there's the possibility that thought could be on that same wavelength, similar wavelength. They're doing all kinds of work to try to analyze it and control it. But if you can't control your thoughts and stop the ones that you don't want and give energy to the ones that you do want, you're not just affecting you. If it's the demon on one shoulder and the angel on the other, and you're always listening to the demon and you're thinking it and you're amplifying it and you're putting it out there, you are part of the problem.
Yeah, and
Okay.
we've got precedent as well, haven't we? I mean, you look at Rupert Sheldrake and some of his work. So, and again, if you look at the double slit experiment and Emoto, so we know that it's categorical that I mean, Sheldrake calls it. I think that the he calls it morphic resonance, where
Mhm.
consciousness seems to almost drop into this big sea of I don't know what you'd call it, this the ether, or this esoteric component. And as well, the other thing that really stands out to me is that the attacks on humanity seem to be, at least in one area, aimed very specifically at trying to dampen down that connection to this more wonderful and esoteric type of thing that we can access. And maybe that's through the pineal gland, maybe it's not. But you look at the effects of our foods, the sugars, the poisoning of the water, the fluorides, the fear components, as you said, the electromagnetic components. To me, they seem to be, oh, it seems to be almost deliberate on the part of they, again, whatever that means, that they want to really
So,
disconnect
so
us from our beauty.
somebody just earlier today told me who they are. Okay. The hierarchy enslaving you. That's who they are. Um,
Yep.
and
Very
and
simple
so
and very accurate.
yeah, and I don't want to put that out there. And so with what I've been doing with the WHO, part of it is witnessing how people who are um, on the same side, if you want to look at it that way, attempting or trying to achieve the same goal, but yet when they speak about it, they say, speaking in sort of the future tense, this is going to happen and they're going to do that and they're going to do this, and then our rights are going to be infringed upon, so forth and so on. I'm like, no, 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 no. Wait a minute. Okay, you can say that's what they're trying to do, but at some point you got to turn that energy around and you got to say, we're not having that. Here's how it's going to be.
Are
And
you are you implying, James, in one way that and this is something I think, by the way, that's a deliberate strategy of them putting out these kinds of things into consciousness with the idea of that actually manifesting, and our way of resisting that is to have an awareness about what's going on, and then to use our consciousness to combat their plans. Or am I off track there?
isn't isn't that a tricky thing? Okay, where language really, really matters. And so you got to look in the mirror. And I'm not saying, even remotely, that I am perfect about it. You catch yourself slipping up, and you're like, oh, that's not what I really want is this. And so envisioning where you want to go. I mean, if you just take the idea of getting from point A to point B, you can get across town in probably an infinite number of ways, but you got to know where you're going. And it's not good enough to just say, well, I don't want to go there. I don't want to go there. You just meander around all over the place. And so, what the original discussion of the experiment was, had no one ever said a word about these negotiations that have been going on in secret, then the people involved in the negotiations would have had primarily only their own thoughts to contend with in facilitating these negotiations, with thousands, maybe even millions of people aware that that's going on. having their own thoughts about what's going on, it jumbles up the mix. It has irrevocably altered the experience. Now, where it goes from there is up to millions of people to decide, well, where do you want it to go? And so, interestingly enough, in these negotiations, pages and hundreds of pages of documents, I can read through the documents and I can say, well, and I literally have. I mean, I've got a green marker and I've got a red marker, and the green stuff is the stuff that I like, and the red stuff I think I don't like. And so you can read these documents. You can read the Sustainable Development Goals and the 169 sub goals. About 25 to about from a quarter to a third of the Sustainable Development Goals are kind of okay, but they're not implementing those. They're implementing the ones that are kind of not okay. All right. And so to look at it and say, oh, it's all bad. Well, there are things that people have suggested that you go, yeah, that's good, but it's got this poison pill of things in it that just cannot be accepted along with that, trying to mush it all together. So you get a lot of horrible with, a little bit of good. They want you to focus on the good and not pay attention. In legislative thing, they say it has a poison pill. There's a little stipulation in there somewhere that you just can't have it, so it kills the whole darn thing. They're having substantial difficulties even deciding, should this topic go into that negotiation, or should that topic go into this negotiation, or both? They've created a mess for themselves because they're actually trying to negotiate two separate agreements at the same time. It is an absolute mess. And so on another level, I wake up every morning and I sometimes think that God is putting on a theatrical production for my entertainment because I'm the only person in the theater watching the show. Okay. I mean, I was up from midnight to 4 a.m. on Friday watching what they were doing in Geneva at 9 a.m. I'm in California. So for me, it was the middle of the morning. Um, it's a soap opera. It's more entertaining than a lot of TV shows that I may have watched in the past, but it's also real life. And they're trying to essentially set up a structure to fund looking for pathogens, to bring them into a laboratory, to do gain of function research, to make drugs, to prevent the next pandemic. And you just go, isn't that how we got into this mess in the first place? Is this a satire? Is this a parody? Are you guys goofing on me here? Seriously, that's what you're doing to prevent what just happened along those lines from happening again? This is a clown show.
There's a lot of places you can just go with that theme. So, is it accidental? Because you've got these vested interests who are making huge sums of money by doing, and I use the word very loosely, research. So there's almost, so in order to kind of get funding, they need to be able to come up with these paradigms, which are essentially straw man. The other thing that jumps to mind, and I'm very interested to hear your thoughts on this, and I'm probably 80% towards thinking that this has got a lot of merit, is the terrain theory versus germ theory. I think, for just subjectively from my point of view, that the paradigm we're given about viruses is grossly inaccurate, to the point where I'm not even too sure we can catch viruses. There's another I guess idea about toxicity and us injecting these things that have viral components by way of vaccines and whatnot. Where do you stand in relation to your thoughts about the validity of these vectors like coronavirus, for example, and causing these big
Well,
diseases?
I'll use an analogy to try to get the point across. It's difficult to see, literally see, these microscopic things that people are talking about. Okay. And so when somebody makes a claim about something that you could verify, I'll pick a crazy analogy. You come over to your friend's house and a large tree in his backyard has fallen over, and he's trying to clean up the mess and cut up the tree and get and deal with it. He might say to you, "Oh, it got struck by lightning." He might say, "Oh, it was really rainy and it was old and it just tipped over." He might say it was really, really windy. It could be any number of any one of a number of reasons why it fell over. You could look at it, you could be a detective, you could try to figure out what the heck happened. If there was a camera showing it, you'd have some evidence. If cameras, everything can be made up these days, who knows, right? So when things are done on a microscopic level that you can't see and you can't verify, the level of quote unquote evidence, that you need to have, you got to realize that what you're dealing with is a story.
Hmm.
And if somebody's got a really good story, people are going to go for it. Somebody's got another story that sounds really good, they're going to go for that because you can't see the darn stuff. It's too small. And so if you work on the premise that you accept some of what they're saying, if there's a little packet, whether it's a lipid nanoparticle or it's some sort of protein coating, it's got some RNA or some DNA in there, arguably, that's an information packet. If you follow their same logic, there are bacteria that survive antibiotics, and they somehow manage to wrap that information up in a packet and share it with other bacteria, and pretty soon that knowledge has been spread. There's talk that whatever the heck the percentage of our own DNA is actually viral DNA. So if all that is information, okay, and it's packaged up and sent all over the place to inform every cell in your body about, hey, here's what I learned, let everybody know, maybe, just maybe, the response that people have to new information is a direct correlate to how they respond by rejecting that new information. So if the body's way of sharing information is subliminally rejected, okay, is that good or bad? Are you afraid of a virus? And when that virus shows up, you have got this programming that makes your immune system kill you in the process of trying to get this information from not coming in. The metaphors behind all of this, as are the metaphors for all of life and all of disease, when you study things like Louise Hay and Truman, there's a book, Thoughts Buried Alive Never Die, right? When you understand that your emotional state, those thoughts that keep going on in your head, and the ones that are buried even deeper that you're not even conscious of, I can't tell you how many stories, we could talk for days about how people who exhibit physical health issues, there's a correlate to some trauma in their past, some pattern in their present, some mental thought that they just will not let go of. And it gets to the point where it's so consistent and so long-lived that it shows up in the physical world. You don't fix those things in the physical world. You fix them on a mental, emotional, spiritual, metaphysical level, like thinking changes water. It's much, much deeper than, hey, I talked to you for 5 minutes, you got a couple of symptoms, go to the pharmacy and take another poison. And if you're afraid of something that you might get in the future, let me inject a different poison into you. Give me your money through your insurance company so it doesn't feel like you paid for anything. Take that to the bank and go do it again. Did you make anybody healthier? No, you made them more sick. And that feeds the industry of preying upon people who don't want to think more deeply about, well, wait a minute, this world isn't what I thought it was.
And
So,
and even more than that, you kind of have the confusion and I guess the obfuscation of things that we know about, like the placebo effect and the nocebo effect.
mhm.
So you know,
Oh man, if a
for
placebo is
yeah.
effective 30% of the time,
That's
crank it up
exactly
and
right.
use it.
Absolutely. And they use
Absolutely.
that paradigm to validate the fact of these medications working. And then the
Yeah.
other thing, which is adds another layer of confusion. I guess this is why it's important for people like us to be having these discussions and getting stuff out there, is even the effects of generational trauma and epigenetic effects. And it's very easy, I think, for the people who are attacking humanity to have the evidence and then to suggest that their way of looking at the evidence is accurate. So, in other words, there is a virus, it does exist, it does cause this, we have medications, they do fix X, Y, and Z. But then when people like yourself, you start to dig deeper, there are plenty of other explanations which invalidate all of their hypothesis.
Mhm. And denying the existence of the exception to the rule is probably the cardinal sin of science. Okay.
Explain that,
My
James. Sorry, what that was
Sure. Well,
something deep. You said it there, and I didn't quite catch it. So tell me that again.
I don't even know if I can repeat it because it's flowing through me, but I can explain it.
Yeah,
Um, if you have a hypothesis, okay, you observe something and you go, oh, I wonder if this is what causes that. Okay. And you're open, to the scientific method, and you do some experiment, you do another observation, and it blows your hypothesis out of the water. Hey, I guess my hypothesis was at least wrong in that case. It doesn't fit every situation. If you're true to the craft, you go, hey, I have this hypothesis. Come on over here and help me break it. Okay. And everybody who tries can't break it. And the hypothesis holds with a little bit of experimentation. You call it a theory. If you try for the longest time and nobody figures out, hey, maybe it gets to become a law. And that's really how things are, right? Well, you get one exception, the theory goes out the window. How many exceptions do you need to put into the VAERS reporting system to say, pardon me, they're not safe? What's your definition of the word safe? What does that even mean when someone says something is safe? It should mean that there's no way in the world that it can harm you. Totally harmless. Well, water is not harmless. Okay. You put some bad energy into, you put some hate into water and it'll grow some gross things on, beautiful food. Right. So what is the definition of safe? Well, then you go to the word effective. They've admitted it doesn't, the jabs don't stop infection, don't stop transmission, cause immune dysfunction, leading to death and all kinds of ailments. So what does effective mean? Well, I realized that early on when it went from 95 to 90 to 80 to 70, then they stopped talking about it. Then it went negative. Well, if something is like 500 times more likely to have you come down with the disease that you're doing it to prevent, that's effective, all right. It's just negative. And so for me, it's become really easy. If anybody ever says anything is safe and effective, they're lying or they have no idea what those words actually mean. What they're supposed to say is, well, we studied this and here's the risks. And we think maybe there are some benefits. You get to weigh them based on your demographics, depending upon who you are. Maybe you think jumping off a bridge with the bungee cord um, is beneficial and fun, um, but there is a risk. It's mostly safe, but it's not safe. And so, the best example I've come up with is Russian roulette. You've got a revolver with 6 chambers for bullets. You put one bullet in, you spin it. People do what they do in Russian roulette. It's 84% safe. One of the 6, about 16%, it's really effective. Okay. when
And
you
that's
hear someone say safe and effective, they are lying
yes.
because they're supposed to be giving you as much information as is available, showing you the benefits and the risks, and you get to decide whether you think the benefit outweighs the risk for you.
There's
Anybody ever says it's safe and effective, it really should be a crime. It really, really should be a punishable crime.
there's a number of observations I got there. One is you have these multi-billion dollar companies, and for them to highlight the lack of safety will cost them a fortune. So that's the first thing. So already there's a motive for them
Mhm.
to be duplicitous, whether accidentally or whether because of economic forces or whether deliberately they, again, to use that ambiguous word, want to kill humanity. And to my mind, I don't think I'm far short in saying that that's accurate. The next one would be I just lost my train of thought there with oh yeah, the next one would be the underreporting in VAERS. And this to me
Mhm.
is such a tragedy that already we've got this monumental box of evidence to say that these things are incredibly deadly. And for the people who do a little bit more research, the implication of that underreporting is drastically sinister.
Let me
It's
let me weigh in. Let me weigh
please,
in on that.
yeah,
Okay. Um, Rhetorical question. Maybe not you, maybe not people in your audience, but you can apply this to other people in the world. Um, Ask someone who's been jabbed, however many times, if they have the name, the phone number, and the email address of the person who jabbed them. Okay. Because legally, the person who sticks the needle and pushes the plunger is the person who is supposed to submit any adverse event reports to VAERS. Most people don't even know who the heck that person was. They went to some clinic or some drive up or somewhere. Maybe they went to their doctor and maybe their doctor did it to them. But that is the person who is legally obligated to submit adverse events to the system. How are they going to ever do that if you never see them again?
absolutely. And
Now,
even more onto that, James, one of the other things that's blatantly obvious is to myself is, you know, that again, the cause and effect, the link, the vaccines cause myocarditis. And then people dismiss that. Well, I never got myocarditis. Then we see these turbo cancers. It's not just the incidence of let's just partition myocarditis. It's the collective incidence of all these sudden issues that are popping up, and we really have no idea as to how responsible these jabs are for people will never make the link between a particular illness and getting this. And when you use your Russian roulette analogy, if you, to my mind, add in collectively all the possible effects, whether they be mild to severe, I think we're talking about. I mean, if we could only guess at the percentage of risk involved in taking these shots, but it's high. It's very, very high.
I'm going to get off into the deep end here.
Great. That's where we want to
I'm
go.
I'm not a Trekkie,
Yeah.
although I went through a period of time in my life where 20 years ago I just had a stack of books that I was going through on all kinds of religious, philosophical, metaphysical, all that sort of thing. And at the time, I was living with some friends, and I would come home from dinner. Nobody else would be home, and they were running reruns of Star Trek: The Next Generation. And it was astonishing. Like the night before, I'd be up, late reading a book about metaphysics or religion or some such thing, and it just seemed like the next day's show addressed that, you know, ethical question, whatever it might have been that I was just reading. It was really getting to be kind of freaky coincidental, right? And I didn't realize. And after watching many, many shows, I watched the first episode. And one of the first episode was essentially this godlike creature coming down and putting the crew of the Enterprise of the Next Generation on trial. They were trying to determine whether or not humans as a race should be allowed to continue on in the universe because we were so violent and stupid.
And was that Q
And so
from memory?
Yeah, exactly. There you
Yeah,
go.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so the point of that, episode was the the crew of the Enterprise was looked at as being, the top of the, food chain, if you will, in the human race. And it wasn't really about, whiz bang, shoot 'em up, high tech stuff. It was a morality play.
Hmm.
And the question was, are we worthy to be on this planet? And, is what we're going through right now really a test of everyone's character? Can you deal with what's going on and still find love in your heart for your fellow men and women? Or are you filled with anger and rage? And, there are things that, seem justified to be angry about. But, maybe this is just, Darwin's theory of survival of the fittest. Whether or not that was really his theory or not, that's a whole nother question. But was the human race, have we gotten to be too trusting and too gullible and too respective of authority? And did we need to weed out the people who just do what they're told so that the remainder of the race that hasn't been jabbed, that survives, knows to not just believe everything somebody tells you because they're in a position of authority? I heard somebody talking the other day where they were talking about, I think it was Ben Carson actually, saying how all of the um, organizations and foundational education and politics and healthcare and stuff, we've lost faith in them. We don't no longer trust them. Well, that's because they've not been trustworthy. And is this all just like the first episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation, just a big morality play, challenging each and every one of us to see how we deal with this complex theatrical production that's being put on, to see and test how each one of us responds? I've actually been amazed and impressed that there has not been, and I don't want to manifest this, so I'm going to say it in the right way. The people who have been wronged, okay, have stood their ground primarily peacefully, and that is beautiful. Many people have ended up winning. Say, I'm not taking the jab, they lose their job, come back and fight you in the courts, play fair. The people who are, in my view, on the right side of history are playing fair, are leading with love in their heart, are doing the right thing for the right reasons, even in the face of just abject evil. And if that's who we are going to become as a race, that gives me great hope. And so there's a lot of people who've gotten angry and they're frustrated and whatever, but there are also a lot of people who are reaching out to people who abused them. And we're still all trying to just get them to wake up and challenge authority to see what is obviously real. And it's really more the character test than it is the test of facts and medicine and all that sort of stuff. Do you have empathy? Do you have love in your heart? Do you have kindness that you can give to your fellow men and women? Um, the other side doesn't seem to have that.
And not only that, it's also maybe a bit of a challenge as to whether we can have love towards the enemy that is harming us. And I find that particularly challenging because I think there's also a lot of space for the warrior archetype. Maybe that's misguided on my part. But the other thing, which again, I'm gonna contest a little bit of what you say there, based on uh, my observations in the years in the health system, and obesity is a really good one. And I initially kind of, I guess, fell into the trap, at the beginning of my career, especially in nursing, of having this prejudice towards people who are obese, and then my thoughts kind of evolved. And some people who are obese, as a good example, have no choice. They have almost no choice because they are being poisoned from A to Z. The information they're giving is poisoned. Another example might be people who have childhood vaccine injuries, and for let's say autism or people on different psychological spectrums, can can they really have full control over their choices? So in other words, the love, the forgiveness, the I think people like yourself and myself to a certain extent, I guess as well, we're incredibly lucky to have the capacity to be able to possibly try and shape our destinies. But for a lot of people, in adverse uh, who have really adverse circumstances, whether that be from early childhood onwards, how how can they be expected to push humanity towards that more positive direction if they don't have the building blocks to do that? I hope that question made sense.
The thought that it raises, and I'll try to wrap it up because I know we're hitting the edge of time here.
Yeah.
Um, I don't remember the book that I read this in, and again, it's just a hypothetical. It's a thought exercise,
Mm.
maybe, or maybe it's real. But they talked about the advanced civilization of Atlantis, and at the time they were maybe even more advanced than we are now. And the rhetorical question to get you thinking was, well, if you believe in reincarnation, and the souls that were alive then are here now, maybe the doctors have come back to have the experience of being a patient and vice versa.
Mm.
And I've dealt with people who you can lay facts right in front of them and they don't want to see them because that's not the experience that they are here to have. I had a conversation with the woman, got into an argument. I essentially said to her, I could sell you everything in the store, all the vitamins and herbs and all stuff. But essentially, the input was that she was working this job that was killing her.
Mm.
And I said to her point blank, I said, I can tell you everything here, but if you consider, keep on doing this stressful job, I can't fix that. You're the only person who can fix that. She stormed out of the store, didn't buy anything. I'm sorry, I'm living in my truth. Year and a half later, a woman comes into the store. I'm standing behind the counter. She comes right up to me and she goes, I don't know if you remember me, but a year and a half ago, you were right. I'm like, okay, refresh my memory. She's like, I quit my job. My health cleared up. All the stress went away. She was here to have the experience she's having. What you learn from it is how you deal with it, and that is a test of your character. That's how you ultimately grow on a deeper spiritual level, is can you handle the good times? Can you, some people can't. Some people win the lottery and they go, they lose it all. Life gets worse, right? Can you handle the stressful times? Can you handle people challenging you? Maybe it's not about them. Maybe it's about you. Maybe it's about, how do you deal with what's going on around us in the world in a way that makes you grow? And if you're growing every day and other people are doing the same, give them the space to have the experience that they are here to have. If they ask you for help, give it to them if you can, but to tell them how they are supposed to experience their life, in my view, is a violation of some kind of code. We're all here to have an experience. We're all here to live our lives. If someone is trying to tell you what you have to do, you have to have the capacity to find the strength to understand that they don't have that right, even if they think they do, even if they think because it's an emergency, you've got to do what they say. Well, that violates some kind of karmic rule, and they will have to deal with those consequences of their own selves, maybe playing a role in the theatrical production that we're all intertwined in here. But I would like to see the final act, or the next act of this theatrical production be much different than it has been, and it is. But we're actors in the play, but we get to write the script. This is all, improv.
Mm.
Make it better. Do a better job at living your life how you want to live it, and encourage everybody else to do the same.
I've only just picked the surface of some of the things I wanted to talk to you about. I really
We'll
wanted
have to do it again. This has been fun.
oh, mate,
This has been
absolutely. I'd
fun.
love to do it again. Yeah. But I really wanted to get down that health aspect a bit more. But I think that this whole conversation about the kind of philosophical kind of ideas about where we're going as a race are just as important. But we've only got about 2 minutes or so left before this stream cuts out. So where can people get a hold of your stuff? Actually, very quickly, I just want to commend you on something else. When I was going through a little bit of your work, I love the fact on your publications, you've gone no copyrights and use this however you will. I can't remember your little disclaimer there, and I just went, wow, I just absolutely commend you for this. So I really want to highlight that. Well done, man. But yeah,
Well,
if you
there's a big story behind that. We'll have to do that next time.
great, yeah, if you can, t tell people where they can find you, what you're doing in a minute or so, that'd be awesome.
Well, the hard part is spelling my name. All right, James Roguski, Roguski. People like to put a Y on it. It's Roguski. So you go to jamesroguski.com or jamesroguski.substack.com and give me a phone call. My number is 310-619-3055. I'm in California. You can use Telegram or Signal or WhatsApp or text message or whatever. What I have found is that people who call me because they have questions are my kind of people, because if you're still able to think, you got to have questions.
Mm.
And the people who don't have any questions don't want to call me because they just do what they're told, and nothing I can do to help. Anybody who wants to chat me up, please feel free. Love to continue this type of conversation with anybody.
Absolutely. James, I really thank you for you being so gracious with your time. And I know that's a theme of yours. You just seem to be out there and accessible to whoever wants to chat to you. So again, thank you so much. And I'm gonna hit you up and abuse your time a little
Look
bit
forward
more
to it.
because
No, look forward to it. This
because
is fun.
I want to break open the health side of things. You're listening to Dennis from Awakening in Health, and I am chatting to an incredibly talented man, I think, and very gifted, James Roguski. Thank you very much.
Thank you.